Hey there, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Varun Sriram with UCAN, and we are thrilled to welcome Alexi Pappas to the show. Alexi, welcome to the broadcast today, but more importantly, welcome to the UCAN team.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. We are all in a virtual forest together because I have here my wallpaper, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of the UCAN team.
It's been a long time coming. Been using UCAN for a couple of years now. We'll talk about that as we go on, but thrilled to make it official. And Alexi, you're joining us from the virtual forest right now, but in actuality, the real forest as well, from Mammoth Lakes, California, where you're training. Set the scene a little bit for us, for those folks who haven't been to Mammoth. Where are you right now? What's it like?
Yeah, so I am living right now in Mammoth Lakes, California, which is at 8,000 feet elevation. We can run as high as 9,000. We can drive down to a track, which is at 7,000. But Mammoth is the home to many legends, including, many of my role models, Meb, Dina Castor, have lived and trained here during the pinnacle of their career. And so I naturally floated my way here and felt so welcomed by the community here and also the energy that Mammoth brings because of its rich history in running.
Now, speaking of a rich history in running, you talked about Mammoth. You had the incredible experience recently. Guess not so recently anymore, a couple of years ago now, but for competing for the Olympic team for Greece. So tell us how that went down. I want to talk about you getting your start in running, but the opportunity to compete at the Olympics, competing for the Olympics for Greece. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so I am a dual citizen, and I had this opportunity to compete for the United States or for Greece, and chose to compete for Greece for similar reasons. I think that some of my mentors, like Dina Castor, decided to do, like, to be on the paths that they were on. For me, competing for Greece was one, a huge opportunity to make an impact um, in a place where distance running was born, but there's not a strong female distance running presence, but also to kind of pave the path for more, I think, for just more impact in the sport in a place where there's not. Like in Greece, the impact that I've had is like it's so huge. And to go to the Olympics where the Greeks march in first at the opening ceremonies, and that was like unbelievable because I felt like I was like a part of history, but also adding to it as a national record holder. And it was certainly a thrill and continues to like open doors for me that I haven't had before.
Yeah, and we kind of jumped a little bit ahead, but even hearing you retell that story, I know that was such a special opportunity and moment for you. Let's take it back a little bit though to the beginning, Alexi. How did you get started in the sport of running? You've accomplished so much, and you have some bigger goals and big accomplishments ahead of you. But where did it all start?
So I started as an athlete in lots of different sports. I think a lot of runners have started on the soccer field as I did, or the basketball court, or the softball field. And so I certainly have had a long life of athletics, of sports. And with running, that grew to be my strength in all of the sports that I played. However, in running, I felt like I needed to find the right atmosphere before I truly loved it. And for me, that wasn't actually until college where I found a coach and a team that made me feel like it was a group worth working hard for. And it was a group that helped me understand what is so special about running. And so I went to Dartmouth, and I actually was the worst on the team at Dartmouth for the first couple of years because I hadn't run in a couple of years. I was playing soccer. I was doing all these other things in high school, but I was happy in college. And I think that's really what motivated me to improve was that I was happy to show up every day, even when I wasn't the best or even close to the best on the team. And that little bit of progress every year contributed to my goal, which was just to score a team point. And then, I think that's something that UCAN really represents well, is like just like showing up every day and having that progress, that little bit of progress every day add up. That feels like the energy of this community, and it's really what I owe to my success and to my longevity in the sport.
So that's a really great perspective to hear you talk about that. What were the things that drove you? You talked about just the goal of wanting to score a point. What were other ways to motivate yourself at something that you admittedly said you weren't the best at? Why did you stay motivated to keep showing up?
I think my goal was always just to matter. And I remember talking to my dad, and he's always had us like, we don't really quit things in my family without really good reason. And he encouraged me to keep showing up and keep finding ways to matter. And so when I wasn't mattering on the field, like I wasn't scoring that team point, I made sure to matter in other ways. So for me, that meant showing up to the Ivy League championships, which were on Halloween my freshman year, in a costume and cheering at the top of the hill. And that was something I remember. I traveled to New York City. I got myself there because I wasn't on the travel squad, and I was at the top of the hill in a snake costume with this guy from Brown who was also not competing, and he was wearing a Burger King costume. And I'll never forget just how meaningful that was, because when I was finally able to compete in that Ivy League championship a year later, I felt such gratitude. And so I think always finding a reason to be there, a reason to matter, even if it's not in the traditional team point way, is so motivating and so important.
So now you're entering a phase of your running career where, coming up in a month, you're going to be tackling the marathon and doing that competitively for the first time. Do you look back on any of what you just talked about, kind of being able to rise up or overcome something new, something that might be scary? Like, does that experience still drive you as you're getting ready to experience the marathon for the first time? Is there anything similar at all?
For sure. I think what is similar is this this sense of curiosity and permission to try something that I have never done before, and having a little bit of a sense of humor about it. So knowing that this marathon really matters to me. It's a sport, the marathon, that I've wanted to try for so long, but I also, it's such a joy to be here that it's like, it almost makes you like giggle, because like I'm serious and excited, but I'm also like, wow, I get to toe the line in my underwear and run through a city, not my underwear, but like basically. And so I think for all of us, the marathon is a milestone for so many of us to try. And it's so good to take it seriously enough, but also have that same sense of humor that I had when I was in college, crawling across finish lines, where I was like, nervous, and it meant a lot to me, but I also could like laugh with myself. And that was really important.
So you've been running, for a long time, and you've been competing on the track, both collegiately and professionally. If we didn't mention it, you ran the 10,000 meters at the Olympics for Greece. How different is this marathon training now compared to, like, it's not like you've never run long in your life, right? You're used to running long. So what is different about training for a marathon that you found compared to what you were used to?
So the biggest difference I found between the track training and the marathon training is that the keystone workout during the week is the strength workout rather than the speed workout, which sounds super specific, but when I was training for the 10,000, I was always nervous for one workout a week, usually, maybe all of them a little bit, but the big one was the one on the track, was the speed workout. And now the hard, character building workout is the strength workout for me. And it's tomorrow, it's Fridays. And it's different because it's more a game of getting through the volume, and it's less glamorous, but that you're putting all these ingredients in your crock pot and they're going to show up eventually, hopefully on race day. But it's not as glamorous. I don't have times and paces to write home about, but if coach says I've done a good job today, then I totally trust him,
One of the interesting things when you talk about the marathon, say from like a professional runner perspective versus just the everyday person that's signing up for a marathon, and Meb talks about this a lot, is like you're not only focusing on your own race, but there's strategy that goes into it. You're thinking about what the other competitors are doing. When you're in a situation where you're running your first marathon, is it in any way more similar to, say, the everyday person where you're focused more on yourself, or is some of that strategy, like, are you looking at the field and saying, who else is running Chicago? What might they be doing? How do I sort of, how does my race fit into that? How do you approach it?
Yeah. So I think, Meb is such a great example of someone who's like just a competitor. Like he's going to race the race he's in. And for me, I think certainly for this first one, there's an element of, similar to my peers who are maybe running their first marathon alongside me, there's an element of planning. And I think my coach will certainly give me some sort of guidelines, at least for the first, 2/3 of the race, because he wants me to have a good experience. Like he wants me to be introduced to this new sport in a certain way, to have longevity in it, and to just experience 26 miles for the first time. And so I think in future marathons, I maybe let go a little bit more like Meb is, and allowed to choose my own race tactics. But for this one, I think certainly there'll be an element of like of inward looking, as you said, that many of my marathon peers who may be watching this might be planning for themselves as well.
So you gave us a great perspective on, the training and how that's differed for the marathon compared to the training you're used to. How about the fueling, and not just, what you're eating and drinking around competition, but even just like the overall outlook on nutrition? How different is it? What are, or even if it's not overall totally different, like, are there specific things that you're like, hey, when I'm training for a marathon, I realize that I should be doing this?
Yeah. So as you know, I started to get a taste of this marathon fueling even before I was a marathoner. I've come to Mammoth Lakes and trained with the Mammoth Track Club since 2014, and so there was always these opportunities. The Mammoth Track Club gets these water bottles along their run, so coach will pass a fluid bottle during a long run, and so naturally I started trying to figure out how can I fuel like my peers, because ultimately fueling during your preparation is not just about getting through the run and the workout. It's more about how are you going to come back the next day. I think that's the biggest adjustment for me, is knowing that fueling during training is not just to get you through training. It's to get you to the start line feeling, vivacious, feeling energized, and feeling whole. And so for me, I've learned, I've been using UCAN actually, for many years now, including before my Olympic race. And when I was a track runner, I primarily used it before the race, in like my pre-race meal. And that was really important because at that time, the 10K felt very long to me. And I was like, how am I going to stay running for 6 miles? And now I'm doing that, but I've upped like the amount of fuel that I use before runs and workouts, which for me has been, multiple servings of UCAN before my longer workouts. And then the additional piece to the marathon training is fueling while you're working out, while you're running, and right afterwards. And I always knew it was smart to eat something right after you run, but I didn't realize how important it was, uh, particularly in marathon training, just to simply get you back the next day feeling good. And so I'm having, fuel, and for me, it's in the form of UCAN before, during, and definitely after all of my harder efforts, and even before my, recovery days. If that answers
And
it.
yeah, that was great overall perspective. And, Alexi, we were chatting a little bit before we got on, just like, even for athletes with all these different types of nutrition, even if we're talking about like powdered products, there's so many different types of powders, right? There's like protein, which has its function. There's electrolytes, which has its function. When you're talking about fueling with UCAN, how do you think of like the purpose or the why behind what UCAN gives you as an athlete? And that sort of feeds into the strategy of how you're using it. But like, what does it give you as an athlete?
That's a great question. And for me, and I think for everybody, the difference between, so electrolytes are crucial on their own to hydrating. Protein is like rebuilding muscle, recovery, but the UCAN product for me feels more like fuel and energy, and it feels very distinct from the other elements of my fueling routine, because it's the thing that sort of strings along my energy throughout the workout, and extends my recovery. Whereas the electrolytes, which I also need, and the protein, which I also need, are more directly responding to my hydration needs and my like rebuilding, muscle, or whatever protein specifically does. So for me, UCAN has always been a really specific and reliable source. Like, for example, when I was in Rio, I knew there was a dining hall. I knew I was going to be able to get meat and coffee and bread and like those basic things, but I wasn't sure what I would be able to get for race day. And so the things that I made sure I brought were my UCAN packets and like some peanut butter, because I wasn't sure what peanut butter would be available in another country. And on race day, I woke up pretty early because my race was at 11 in the morning, and I feel like a few hours before, and I didn't go to the dining hall that morning because I had planned ahead of time and had my UCAN packet. And so for me, it's really like, it's reliable, and it's something that I know will sustain me, but it's also distinct from the other elements of my fueling routine, because it's not like enhancing my performance or doing anything like that, but it's sustaining the work that I've put in, and it's allowing me to execute on a longer term and like consistent level, if that makes sense.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And you've kind of, because you're kind of very strategic in knowing what it gives you and how you want to apply it to your training, you've kind of been creative in terms of how you've consumed it, right? So could you give us maybe an example of how you might mix it into food versus what you did, just a few days ago, mixing it just in fluid?
Yeah. So when I have like a slow morning before workout, I'll put it into my oatmeal, and that will often be chocolate flavored. And that's like pretty, I think you can imagine that would taste pretty good in oatmeal. But when we're going for like a longer drive, like Sunday, we had a really big long run, and we had a long drive to go down in altitude. And I mixed, it was like 2.5 packets of my lemonade UCAN into warm water, actually, because I liked the consistency. I liked the way, and I also liked, it was a cold morning. It was like this nice feeling. And I mixed that with some beetroot powder, which I sometimes will use before long workouts as well. And the beetroot powder, I think, it helps somehow with like your oxygen carrying capacity, and I'm not sure, but it's fine. Like it doesn't hurt me. But then the UCAN was something where I felt like drinking it on the way down was going to get me through what was like a 2.5 hour long run that I was pretty nervous for. So in that context, it was more of a drink. But when I have time to have like a slow breakfast, I'll usually have it in oatmeal in the form of like a, you know, it's just adds flavor and texture really to your oatmeal.
Awesome. There's also a during and post component of it as well, but we're going to save that for our next chat because I want to chat with you in the time we have left about a few other things. So we heard a lot about your running career, you know, the fueling, the training, what's coming up next. But you've got a whole diverse set of interests outside of running. So want to spend a little bit of time letting folks get to know that side of you as well. So sort of maybe at a summary level, Lexi, what are the things that you're really passionate about and that you're pursuing outside of running that really gets you excited?
Yeah, I've always loved, I mean, I've always felt, and I think all of our UCAN team can identify that like we can't run 24 hours in a day. And sometimes it's healthy to have a reason to end practice or, you know, just a reason to, to to move on and then let, you know, one day's training be that day. And like for me, the outlet has been very creative, and right now there are film projects, a film called Tracktown, which has been readily online and released, and we're now just finishing our next feature film. So I act and I write, and I'm also writing a book with Rand House called Bravey. So I keep very busy, but my time is primarily to my running, and then the creative stuff fits in, you know, after a nap or in the evenings. And I found that the two are not as dissimilar as they seem. I think running and writing are both learned disciplines, so you can put in time and become a student of both things and improve.
So that's an interesting thing to hear you talk about, you know, the discipline that athletics and running, you know, kind of instills in you from a creative standpoint as well. How much do you find that one feeds into the other? Like, do you look at what you do creatively a lot being inspired by your running, or do they live separately in a way?
I've always wanted my running to stand on its own and my creative stuff to stand on their own, like to make a good movie regardless of who I am, to run a great race regardless of my film work. However, they're certainly informed by one another. The running has opened up many doors for the creative stuff that I do. And I think from a discipline standpoint, it's just, they're similar in that like you just have to show up every day and know that, you know, there are going to be like along the course of like the beginning and your goal, there are going to be these like great days, less good days, okay days, but it's all, that's normal. Like to feel great some of the time, not great some of the time, and okay some of the time is like a normal part of both of those equations. And I think it's helped me to be an athlete and know that, you know, as athletes, we rarely win, or we're a lot of the time we're just working. And to know that as a creative has given me like a lot of uh, patience and longevity, and probably vice versa too, because sometimes a creative project is like so out of your hands, or you have to wait or something like that. And with running, there's a relief in me being able to take my own body out the door and go for a run.
Yeah, it's interesting, kind of like the control you have in one element in running, but then again, you can't control what other people do. So there's sort of like, I guess, elements of control and elements of what's out of your control
Yeah.
in both. What I also wanted to ask you is, you know, sports, I guess, and especially sports as you get to the professional and the elite levels, it can be a very compartmentalized world. You've obviously surrounded yourself with a team of people and in an environment where your creative pursuits are also being supported. But have you ever felt growing up, or do you ever have any advice for other people that might want to pursue a diverse range of interests? They are very good in sports.
Yeah.
Like, how are you able to sort of break through that idea of like, I have to be single channel to be a successful runner?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to embrace everything you're doing as a choice. Like if you're balancing schoolwork and a school team, to feel like, okay, if I have to write an essay on a bus, to not feel like, oh, I have to write this essay on the bus, to be like, wow, I've like chosen to go compete and I've chosen to go to school. So just having an attitude of choice rather than sacrifice, I feel like has been really, really good for me, is to not feel sorry for myself by realizing that all the things I'm doing, I'm choosing to do. And then I think really knowing what are your goals and what do you need to get there. And that sounds so basic, but I remember even when I was graduating from Dartmouth and from Oregon and trying to figure out what professional environment to be in, my dad was like, well, what are your goals? And I was like, well, I want to go to the Olympics. And he's like, okay, well, what do you need to get there? And it boiled down to really basic things. It was like I needed a coach for me, I needed an environment to be in, and I needed to feel like I was thriving. And for me, that equation landed me in Eugene, Oregon until the Olympics. And so I think for anyone trying to pursue one thing or multiple things well, the most important thing is to write down that goal and then write down the few really important things you need to get there, and then clearing out the rest. Like you don't need to be, maybe you don't need to be filthy rich, so then forget that. Maybe you need to not be in a city, then forget that. Or maybe you do want to be in a city. So there are things that make it pretty simple, and then executing it with that energy of like, oh, I'm choosing to do this, is so empowering.
I think a lot of people like hearing you talk about having that goal and saying like, hey, I want to go to the Olympics. What do I need to do that? Like a lot of people would probably say like, of course I want to go to the Olympics. That sounds awesome. But not everybody takes that next step. Like what made you take that next step? Why did that fire burn so strong in you where you were like, I want to go to the Olympics and now I'm actually going to do X, Y, Z, move to Eugene, get a coach and do what I need to do to make this happen?
For me, I've really felt lucky to find mentors and people who believe in me and give me permission to believe in myself. So I've latched on to those people who have given me those. It's not even just that they've opened the door, they've like pointed to the door and been like, you're allowed to try to walk through that. Like we don't know what happens, but I've been there and I think you should try it. And that's such a gift, like to find people and if it's, sometimes it's someone in real life, like a coach, but sometimes I've looked at someone from afar, like read a book by a movie star that I admire and just decided that whatever rules they've applied to themselves, I can apply to myself too. So I think there's an element of finding people who believe in you, but also knowing that you can cultivate it within yourself by faking it till you make it, like pretending and adopting mantras that resonate with you or worldviews or just pretending that somebody is much closer to you than they might actually be.
Love to hear your perspective on that. You were talking about mentors, and I want to close with this one for you, Alexi, before we sign off, and appreciate your time tonight. It's been great having you on. So in talking about your own mentors, it seems, I guess, from afar, kind of through observation of your social media and some conversations we've had, that you've kind of taken that role seriously in terms of trying to pass it on to the next generation of athletes. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how did that come about? Why are there so many high school runners that really seem to connect with you and draw inspiration for you? And I guess, what do you get out of it as well? So how did it come about where you felt like you had a voice that could influence these younger runners? And why do you enjoy doing it? Why do you do it?
Yeah, well, it's a privilege, and I think it's a responsibility when you have the opportunity to have a platform like I do. And where it came about, I think, is just simply being able to when I was little, all I wanted to do was imitate my mentors. Like for me, it was like Mia Hamm and Brandy Chastain, because those were the most present female athletes in my life. And so I wore a sweatband and I liked to run around in my sports bra, and those were really imitatable things. And so with my young young, often young audience, I think I'm aware that the best gift you can give someone is the gift of confidence. And the best way to feel confident is just to feel connected with someone and to give them something that they can imitate, that I feel good about them imitating, has been like a big mission for me. So rather than, I think the content that I put out, you're never going to know like how fast my workouts were, how long my long runs were, because that information you can get from other people and it's out there, and it's just not something that would have benefited me when I was a 15-year-old girl. Like, I shouldn't have run 20 miles when I was 15. I didn't. But if I were imitating someone who was, I might have tried. And so for me, I really try to focus on simple things that I feel comfortable with a young person imitating. And I think that has resonated with people, I hope. And what I get out of it is truly just a purpose in the sport, like to make to give some young people permission to like fuel themselves properly and enjoy their sport and feel deserving of good things. Like it's such a gift to have the ability to communicate like that. And I think the fueling aspect has been more on my radar lately, because I've been getting, up to 30 messages a day of young people who don't feel deserving of fueling themselves. And that's so challenging to see, because it's just important in our sport, and it must be hard to not feel like you can eat. And so I think that is empowering to me, and it makes me want to find better ways to communicate with them, because I'm convinced that it's just about hearing it from the right person and hearing it in the right way.
You talked about confidence, you talked about empowerment. Something that comes out a lot in your interactions is the idea of being brave, and the term bravey, which your fans have kind of latched onto. So maybe just last one, building on what you just said, where did that whole idea of being brave and the term bravey, how did that come about? What does that mean both to you and to people that that connect with you?
The word bravey started in a tweet, and it just simply rhymed well with other words. And as with like people wearing their hair in a bun like me and calling themselves a bravey, it really was like a reciprocal thing where people responded to it and repeated it. And then I realized like, oh, that's like a very, that's a good word. And then I just kept using it. And I think what's fun about being a bravey is that it's a choice. And I like that, because sometimes I've heard words like fierce or strong or things where I don't know, you could choose like I would like to aspire to be strong, or I would like to aspire to be fierce, but with a bravey, it's just simply you can choose to be it and you are. And I like that. I like that about it. And what it specifically means, I think, is really personal to everyone. And I love hearing what a bravey feels that a bravey is. But I think the most important thing is that it's simply a choice that you make, and that you're allowed to make it, and that you're never not a bravey, even if you don't feel like one. You can you get to be if you want to be.
It's clear from the reaction that I've seen that that's really something powerful that resonates with a lot of people. So I think it's a great message. Thanks so much, Alexi. It's been a lot of great ground covered today. I know, like every conversation, we always leave wanting to extend it a little bit longer, but we will do this again. I really want to thank everyone in the audience who joined us today. This will be on our Facebook page, so you can go back and listen to the entire conversation with Alexi at your convenience if you joined us late. But good luck training for Chicago. We're pumped. We'll be there. We'll be rooting for you. Can't wait to see you there, and hope the next several weeks go really, really well.
Thank you so much. And I hope that everybody on our UCAN team out there knows that we're all, we all have like something in common. And I think that's really special. And I'm really excited to see many of you in Chicago, I hope. And if not, we are satellite pals for life.
And Alexi, before we sign off, how can people keep up with you if they want to follow you on social media? If they want to kind of see what you're doing, what's the best way for people to stay up with you?
Well, if they want cool pictures, my Instagram is at Alexi Pappas, and my Twitter is the same.
Perfect. It's at Alexi Pappas. So thank you so much. Big thanks to Alexi, and thanks to all of you in our audience for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.